Today we're going to be looking at Mesa Verde, and this site itself is very much linked to the previous lecture on Pueblo Bonito. But the difference with Mesa Verde is that it's a very different type of landscape, in that the reasonings for what happened at Mesa Verde are very different from the reasonings that we saw the abandonment of Pueblo Bonito. It wouldn't be fair for me to ask what happened with the people at Mesa Verde, because the view that I take is very different from one that might be in your minds. And the evidence is basically in those original discoverers of the Mesa Verde landscape. Now, one thing that I decided to do with this lecture is not look it up on the internet at all. I decided on Monday to get all the images off the internet, as I've been doing, and I decided to go for a few of my books off the bookshelf. So we've got Archaeology by Colin Renfrew and Paul Barn. We've got Archaeology, The History of Archaeology, editor Paul Barn again, and a wonderful publication called Footsteps from the 1980s by Bruce Norman. Now, all of these have a relevant little snippet in them. And obviously, I am a little bit up to date as well. In all of those publications, other than intimated in the one, it basically makes out that the people of Mesa Verde just disappeared. That's not exactly true. But what we do know, the people within that landscape have been there for many thousands of years. In fact, over 12,000 years. The art across the landscape of the 4 states, which we'll explain about in a short while, what that means, is a landscape that goes back 12,000 years, which is one of the oldest landscapes in the North Americas. However, we do know that people have been arriving in North America for at least 30,000 years from very recent information. And we read out about press cutting about that last week. So Mesa Verde, Colorado. Now, I mentioned that word, that entrance word, the 4 states, or the 4 corners of the USA. The 4 corners of the USA are where 4 states meet: Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Arizona, otherwise known as the 4 corners of the USA. And within those 4 corners, what we do find is the heart of a beating and once thriving civilization. And when I use the word beating, that's quite appropriate, because the modern civilization are those peoples that were left behind: the Hopi, the Navajo, the Ute people, and even the likes of those Apache. All of those people have their origins going back to the people of Pueblo Bonito, Chaco Canyon, and Mesa Verde, and other sites. Now, when I do lectures blind, which is sometimes a good thing, you learn more by doing lectures blind than you actually do by reading up about the subject beforehand. And what I mean by doing a lecture blind is the type of thing me and Bill used to do. I used to say, we're going to this location, we're going to learn about it. And usually we learned more about the location than we did by actually reading books. Don't know if Bill will agree with that. Hopefully he will. And with this, we had a load of images on Monday morning. And I said, this is the site of Mesa Verde. And no, it wasn't. It was the site. It was one of the sites at Mesa Verde. And then we started learning that there are over 200 sites, even more, that make up the Mesa Verde landscape. The word Mesa Verde means green table or green top. The mesa is the landscape above the canyons that the structures are actually constructed within. Basically, the canyon itself, all the canyons in North America started off as follows. So basically, there was an underwater river that would erode the limestones and the sandstones from the North American landscape away, and slowly but surely that huge cavern that was created would collapse, creating the canyons across the United States today, particularly within Colorado and New Mexico and so on. But when people talk about this landscape, they talk about a landscape that's bereft of life. Well, that doesn't look bereft of life to me, does it? That's looking towards the tabletop of Mesa Verde today. Note it's green, and note there's trees, and note there's life. And one thing that I disagree with is that the landscape of Mesa Verde was abandoned because it became arid and uninhabitable. The evidence doesn't tell me that. The evidence tells me something very different. It was not a landscape that was abandoned. Something else happened, and it was not disease either. That only leaves one or two answers. Aliens, which we'll dismiss that one, and the other one. But before we actually go there, look at this. Whoa. When I actually, this is actually known as the Cliff Palace. And just think, if you squint your eyes and you were there in 1888, when this civilization was discovered by the white man, the red man always knew it was there, basically. But there was a fight between one Western idea and another Western idea. Do we allow the fact that these people actually created great civilizations? The one side said yes, and the other side said no, because it doesn't do the one side any good. It doesn't do the black or the white people any good for this civilization to have been discovered. And it still doesn't. There are only two types of people who apparently live in North America. One type of people that has dark skin, and one type of people that has white skin. It's almost as if the Native Americans don't have a foot in, when in fact North America was Native American before anyone ever got there. And this is still the argument. This land all belongs to the Native Americans. And this civilization belonged to the Native Americans. It was once thought that the Native Americans, like what we used to think with Mapungwage and Great Zimbabwe and the Matope people, it was once thought that it was never possible for those people to create anything as wonderful as we've got there today. And it's the same can be said for these wonderful creations, Pueblo Bonito and Mesa Verde. And what we're going to do, we're going to go down a rabbit hole. And the first rabbit hole is this one. This book, Archaeology, by Colin Renfrew and Barn. And I just thought, right, I went to the index on Monday. I thought, right, let's go to Mesa Verde. And it came up with 3 hits. That's all, 3. And the first one is as follows. Actually, it's a comparison between Roman Cirencester, England, around 300 years AD, and 550 to 1300 years AD. So here we go. Analysis of 450 skeletons from Roman Cirencester revealed a number of congenital defects to the spine, and 5 skeletons with evidence of spina bifida occulta. However, the most common ailment for these Romans was arthritis in most joints of the body, which was found in about half the males. Rather interesting. Is that anything to do with these people? Actually, as a comparison, it is. At Mesa Verde, Colorado, in the period AD 550 to 1300, every known individual over 35 suffered from osteoarthritis, from what we can work out in the archaeological record. Everyone over 35. So that means that life affected the bone structure. Something happened within that landscape that caused every single individual to have osteoarthritis after the age of 35. That is a very interesting fact. But what is also interesting is what happened to the bones, right? Enough of that. So what we've got lots of individual sites. I've chosen to pick out about 6 or 7 sites today out of the nearly 200 in the Mesa Verde landscape. And I'm sure Pat's actually been there. But seeing the films, The Hills Have Eyes, I don't think I would want to wander around this landscape. And if you've ever seen that film, Jessica, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But anyway, this landscape itself is full of delights. And I tell you what, if me and Bill just visited one of these sites, we would be there all day. We would have no chance to visit 200. We would be in all those nooks and crannies, crevices all over the place. And me and Bill are proud to say that. But this is why I thought when you see the word Mesa Verde, not in any defense, when you ever see the word Mesa Verde, you always think a site, one singular site. Rome, a site. Angkor Wat, well, a massive site, but it's all in one area. But Mesa Verde is a canyon landscape of trees and crevices and little creatures and things that go bump in the night. Mesa Verde itself, this is the palace site at Mesa Verde. This site itself is actually not man imposing on nature, it's nature imposing on man. Nature controlled what man could do, man and women, human beings within this landscape. And this tower itself, let's get really anal with this tower. Let's just get really into it. And look at this tower, okay? Let's go from the bottom. Oh, actually, the bottom's actually that level. So ground floor, first floor, second floor, third floor, fourth floor. So there you go, really tall tower. And when you think about it, actually, no, I haven't missed out a floor. These are really tall ceilings. Now that tower itself is actually still standing after 700 years. The timber in that tower is the same timber that this structure was actually built with. The render on these walls is the same render that this structure was actually built with. Actually, let's go with the other fact. Now you turn to page 118 in Archaeology, Renfrew and Barn. Tree ring dating. When was tree ring dating invented, Bill? Well, actually in about the 1930s, surprisingly enough. It was once believed that the landscape at Mesa Verde was created in about 1800. We'll tell you about that later on. So tree ring dating. The modern technique of tree ring dating dendrochronology was developed by an American astronomer, A.E. Douglas. In the early decades of this century, Bill, we are old, I mean the last century. Although many of the principles had been understood long before that, working on well-preserved timbers, and this is an opportunity, the arid American Southwest. In the 1930s, Douglas could assign absolute dates to many of the major sites there. And what do we mean by absolute dates? There's two types of dates, relative dates, absolute dates. So a relative date is a birth certificate. An absolute date is dendrochronology. The tree rings don't lie. A birth certificate could lie. Relative dates are, in fact, historical chronologies of pharaohs or Queen Elizabeth. Absolute dates could be said to be radiocarbon dating, thermoluminescence dating, potassium argon dating, strontium, and, of course, dendrochronology, and other datings bits as well. And they first realized the huge eruption of knowledge that was actually coming out from the new science of dendrochronology from Mesa Verde and Pablo Benito. Yes, Pablo Benito relied upon dating evidence associated with dendrochronology. So what you can actually see behind, get a grip, what's behind there. So that's within a building behind. There's all these ladders everywhere. And actually, you wouldn't be able to go there unless you're actually with a guided tour party. We'll actually come on to this image later on. We come back to it. And this. So the first mistake I made on Monday was actually saying, wow, this is this. And then I thought, there's no tower there. Oh God, where's the tower? So therefore it was a completely different site. Okay. A very, very different site, which again we'll come on to. And what you can see by this is you can see the tabletop there, the mesa, where all the trees are planted. And look at those lush trees. Well, the problem is, today we find ourselves within an arid landscape. Really? There's trees. The only way trees can grow is actually moisture. And I don't believe for 1 minute that this landscape became bereft of trees. Trees don't reoccupy a landscape like this if they had all been removed. Case in point, Pueblo Bonito. Case in point, upland Wales. Case in point, the Sahara Desert, right? These trees have always been there. That's what I've learned from archaeology. There we go, Mesa Verde National Park, the drum roll. And there we go to Mesa Verde, Pueblo Bonito, New Mexico. And here's a question, right? Never believe everything you read. How many states in America are actually named after Native Americans? The answer is 26.
Named?
26. There are 26 United States named after Native Americans. And one of them is the Ute people. Utah, that's a Native American name. And if you want to think about it, the Kentucky people, there you go. So there are 26 of them all together. And moving to my next little gem, let's get to the next post-it. Here we go. It was once thought that the people of Mesa Verde, Pueblo Bonito, Guache Canyon, and so on, it was thought that this landscape could not have been created by the ancestors of the Navajo or the ancestors of the Ute people. Could never ever been created. But what we do have is these advanced civilizations. Remember that formula I gave? 1 minus 2 equals 1. Remember that one? 1 minus 2 equals 1. Well, the Navajo, this civilization, Navajo, they're 3 forms of civilization, except the Navajo have done better within their landscape, other than when the white man got there, than probably when they were here. They were living and breathing with the landscape. And you know what? Up until a few weeks before I met Michelle, I was hoping to one day meet a Native American woman to sort me out. And then I met an evil red-headed witch who definitely sorted me out. It's the same difference, because this land is something that I've got a deep level of respect for. You know, I feel a great deal of remorse, and I feel a great deal of pity for the Native Americans, but they don't need pity. They just need our respect to go forward. This is actually known as the Spruce House, and lots of the names within this landscape are associated with what's around them. Like the Square House is named after a building that's perfectly square, and the Step House is named after the fact that, yeah, anyway, you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, they used to have what I found, that they had one called the Great House, which was built on top of a high ground as well. So
bingo. Need say any more? Right, now I've got the Story of Archaeology, lovely book, and it goes as follows: Ancient farmers of the desert. The American Southwest is a magnificent landscape of arid deserts and towering buttes. I don't really agree with that. But it's a landscape full of artifacts, stone and wood, sandals made from the yucca plant, magnificent painted pots, some still full of corn. Architecture, pottery over this vast landscape. And a landscape that became rich in civilization 2,500 years ago. A landscape that we see corn, beans, and squash being grown. Through Central America, may I add, but it's moved up north. Cotton, tobacco, the turkey. Here we go. So we got the turkey there, chuck in the turkey. And obviously we can chuck in the dog as well. But this is something, this thing here is, this next paragraph is something that I disagree with. And despite their success, not even these farmers could withstand forever the droughts that raked the north part of the southwest during the 1200s and the 1300s. And they were ultimately forced to abandon the Four Corners region. I'll explain what that is. The completeness of this abandonment is well exemplified at Mesa Verde. Its Anastasi sites range from early pit houses to large villages built into overhangs on the walls of the canyons that dissect the Mesa. Basically, the word Anastasi isn't used by the Hopi people today because that means foreigner. Just like us dumb, stupid Welsh people call ourselves Welsh when that means foreigner to the English. But the Hopi people, being more intelligent, don't like to refer to themselves as the Anastasi. Don't actually go looking at the name Anastasi on the internet. You'll come up with a dating site. Michelle was not impressed. Bill, I get in trouble researching things, don't I? So these cliff dwellings, of which the largest is Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde, must have been teeming centers during their heyday, with fields of corn and other crops scattered along the Mesa tops. Specially cut stairs allowed the inhabitants to reach their fields on the Mesa tops. The decision seems to have been rapid, for when hundreds of years later, the first European came to sites like Cliff Palace, they recorded that it was though the town had only just been abandoned. And you know, can I swear in the right context? Bullshit. I like to make impact when I use words. And that, from the descriptions that I'm going to read out to you, is completely false. Again, looking at the Spruce Tree Terrace. And you know what? This is more or less, if you sort of squint your eye, this is more or less how the Wetherill family found it in 1887, 1888. Except for where those ladders are sticking out the ground, they were actually filled in with deposition and collapsed walls and stuff. They've had to be rebuilt. They're known as keevers. Now, the keevers is really interesting to me. Again, that's something else I disagree with. When we look at Pueblo Bonito, you couldn't really see it Pueblo Bonito, so I couldn't really argue with it. But one interesting thing is that in front of the housing complexes, you see a keever. There you go. And there's another keever over here. And then you start to think, why are there so many keevers? I can estimate at this site, just a mild estimate, that there were at least 100 people living here. Now, if you work out the amount of sites, just write down the figure 6,000, right? Within the Four Corners area, within the center of those 4 states, right? There were 6,000 settlements. If you work out that on average 100 people lived at each settlement, it doesn't take anybody long to work out that 600,000 people living in that small area alone. So you can't overestimate the people living here. But there's one big question. The word is dur, water, aqua. Every single thing I've read doesn't give a suggestion to where they stored their water. And then some bright Alec in my Lantern Major class turned around and said today, oh, the valley, obviously they went down to the valley every day and collected water. What, for 100 people and their animals every single day? That you're not going to have a city like this, because most of you, they call them little miniature cities. You're not going to have a site like this if you're going down to collect water every day. More of your time is going to spend collecting water than actually building or maintaining a site like this, right? So they must have had areas to store water. Now, every source tells me that the keevers were used for ceremonial and religious reasons. Why? Why were they used for ceremonial and religious reasons? I can't get an answer to that. Were they used for water? Well, there's signs that they had fires in some of them. But if you had a fire in them, how's the smoke going to exit? You've got all these questions. And I believe that these kivas are a lot more important than just ceremonial drab nonsense that archaeologists usually talk about. I like to use the word nonsense because when archaeologists don't know what something is, it's always ceremonial. It always is.
Ritual word.
Yeah, it is. Bill, this is a ceremony doing this. This is a ritual doing this every week. But actually, the real reason is if we want to, well, why do we do these? Why do we do these classes every week? I'll give you a few reasons. I'll give you a mild reason. It's something to do. Secondly, it's to meet other people. Thirdly, it's to learn. Fourthly, it's to expand not just what we're learning, but us expanding how we question life. So that's 4 good reasons. But somebody could say this is a religion. Fair enough. Why do people go to church? Some people go to church just to read out passages from the Bible. It doesn't mean to say they're Christians. Anyway, that's enough said. But look at this. Ooh, we're going to actually go back to all that. What I'd like to do is actually move beyond all these images, and let's start off with the following statement. Now, this book itself was made into a television series. And Anne is in love with the presenter who presented the television series Footsteps. And this publication itself has got some wonderful snippets. Spirits of the Canyon, Richard Wetherill. He writes about the area of the 4 corners of the USA and about the discovery at this site. Listen, let's put on an American accent. The number of skeletons found at one level and in one place would suggest a sudden and violent destruction of a community by battle or massacre. Many of the skulls are broken, as well as the ribs and the bones of the arms and the legs. In the backbones of 2 different skeletons, we found the ends of spear points embedded. In one case, the break in the bone was partially healed, showing that the person must have lived for some time after the wound was inflicted. What we can learn from that is quickly the number of skeletons found at this site lying on the surface. Can you sort of get an idea why I disagree with the statement that the Anastasi just disappeared? That is what the Wetherhills found, being the first Westerners to get there in the late 1880s. Am I going to dismiss that? No. Because there's no evidence to say where they went or if they evacuated the site in the first place anyway. So, Richard Wetherill was a cowboy. His ranch was in the Mancos Valley in Colorado, near the 4 corners, the only point in the United States where the boundaries of 4 states meet. It is a land of flat-topped mountains and deep canyons of desert and rock, sandstone rock, and inhabited by the native peoples, the Ute, the Navajo, and the Hopi. White settlers from the east first moved into the area in the 1870s and into inevitable conflict with the native peoples of the area. But one family who were on good terms with these people was the Wetherills. During the bleak cold winters, the Wetherills ran their cattle on Ute territory, otherwise known as Utah today, in the rocky unexplored canyons branching off from the Mancos River, where the natives themselves rarely went. It was the home of the spirits of the people who dwelt in the little ruined buildings which clung high up into the canyon walls. However, do you know when somebody said today they went down every day to get water? How? You know, it's a bit of a trek to go, you know, and you start to think, no, they stored water at the site. And also one little fact, which we will mention, it snows a lot here in the winter months. December, 2 or 3 meters of snow. So therefore, if you collect that snow, you're going to have snow for the winter months. And I don't know what you've just put through, wonderful Henry, but will you tell us all about it? Something Henry mentioned about water.
Yeah, they've actually discovered prehistoric reservoirs have been constructed which would hold water runoff and irrigate agricultural fields.
Do you know what, right? So obviously, all of these books are wrong. I love it. Do you know what? I love being proven to be right. I also don't mind being wrong. But when you think about it, when you looked at the example of Petra, you think about the Bedouins of Petra, and then they created water. They had great systems. They had these water courses and everything. They had water all year round, right? Flowing water all year round. And you look at Petra today and you say, how was it possible? Well, you've just done it yourself. Thank you. They're going to hate you because there's nobody going to be arguing with me about anything today now. So here we go. We're talking about the spirits. It was here that Richard Wetherill was to discover a culture from a Western point of view. The local people always knew this was there, but nobody told the white man. And a civilization undreamt of by the white man, of cliff villages, unique in the world. Cliff villages, well, to some they're cities, to others they're towns. Settlements, that's a nice word. It was here that Richard Wetherill was to pioneer the study of archaeology in the southwestern United States. And here that he was to lose his life in June 1910. The Wetherills were a Quaker family from Pennsylvania. The five brothers, Al, Wynne, Clayton, John, and Richard, sons of Benjamin Wetherill, moved with their dad in 1859 into the landscape of Kansas. And then in 1876, the family moved further west to Colorado. In 1880, unsuccessful and penniless, their wagons arrived in the Mancos Valley. I'm sure the natives would have been a bit peed off with them going into that area. This is the time of the great victory that the native peoples had at the Battle of Little Bighorn. And, you know, there's a lot of friction between the people whose land it is and the invaders, the white man. Compared with the surrounding barrenness, the country of the Mancos Valley was at this point green and fertile. Though the summers could be parched and in the winter, the area could be cut off by heavy falls of snow. The ranch that the Wetherills founded, they called the Alamo, and it prospered. Remember, it was only about 40 years earlier that there was the Battle of Alamo, you know what I mean? A Battle of Alamo, I think that was in 1846. This is in 1876. What was that, Bill?
1836.
It was 1836. So actually, that was weird, wasn't it? I said 40 years before 1876, and I then said 1846. Do you know what I should do is go with my first thought? Anyway, so they called it, it was very prosperous. They had outbuildings, corrals, smithies, houses. And the Mancos Times, which was probably only read by 3 people, one of the most beautiful and fertile mountain farms in the West. The family were Quakers, pacifists. Except for hunting game, they never carried guns, unlike their settler neighbors. They were not hostile to the natives, and the natives weren't hostile to them. The area where the Ute people allowed the Wetherills to winter their cattle was in the Mesa Verde, the Green Table, a vast rocky plateau 8,000 feet above sea level, riddled with gulches and canyons. A gulch is basically a rocky sort of depression which at times has water flowing through it. But a canyon is obviously something greatly vaster and dense with pine trees. It was an area of several hundred square miles and an area in which it was very easy to get lost. In the winter of 1884, the brothers established a camp at the base of Johnson Canyon to watch the cattle. Johnson Canyon is part of the Mesa Verde landscape. To pass the time, they searched the canyons for signs of what they would call the natives back then, Indian ruins. Let's go and find a few Indian ruins that had first been noticed by a geologist searching for gold in 1874. That's interesting, 1874. Not a single Westerner knew about these at all. And even in 1874, nobody believed the geologist. The cliff dwellings were usually high up in the canyon walls, and at first it was difficult to make out what was Indian dwelling and what was natural formation of the rock. But as their eyes became accustomed to the terrain, the houses began to show themselves houses full of abandoned relics, pots and stone tools. Very fine relics indeed. The brothers took many relics back to the ranch, and these were sent by their father to a bookseller in Denver. It was during one of these expeditions that Richard Wetherill was told by a Ute Indian of a secret and sacred place deep in the canyon, bigger than any they had already seen. So what they had seen in the Johnston Canyon was something minor. It wasn't the Mesa Verde that we're talking about now. It wasn't those great sites, but it was a clue. It was a little bit of a clue. And I've just got to turn my alarm off. There you go. These were revelations. This was something new. Now, Al Wetherill in 1887 thought that he'd seen something in Cliff Canyon, Mesa Verde, in 1887. This is what he described. I stood looking at the ruins in surprised awe. I had hoped to find some unexplored dwellings, but this discovery surpassed my wildest dreams. I gauged the steep walls of the canyon against my tired legs, then the air been daylight and turned slowly away. They would wait. They had waited for hundreds of years for the moment of discovery. Oh, fiddly-dee. And that was the first that the Wetherhills really saw of this site, this beautiful, awe-inspiring site. A site that I could spend all day and just be in awe, just looking at the stonework. I know me and Bill would wander off into the old crevice here and there, but other than that, we would look and we would be in awe of this. But there's nearly 200 of these sites to explore in the Mesa Verde landscape. Over 200 of them. Amazing. Nearly 200 of them. On the 18th of December, 1888, Richard Wetherill was in the company of his brother-in-law, Charlie Mason. They were searching for strays, and it was snowing. From one of the deep gullies in the side of Cliff Canyon, they climbed on horseback to a vantage point on the top of the mesa. There, looking up towards the head of the canyon, they saw the most extraordinary sight. In the canyon wall opposite was the mouth of a giant cave filled with buildings. You know, it's almost as if they were looking at a palace of the little people with all these little doll houses in the distance. Could they believe it's real? But they did. They did. It seemed an entire city. Fine masonry buildings piled on top of one another in terraces, towers reaching to the cave roof, strange circular pit-like buildings going into the earth, doors, windows, and every available space filled and protected from the snow by the giant overhang of the cliff. Al Wetherill thought, so we've done the Al Wetherill bit. So this was something new. This was on the edge of greatness. This is to be greatness. And I got to be honest with you, finding something like this would be a lifetime's work, not 182 as they would eventually come to by 1891. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go off a little bit. So, you know, this is probably, squint your eye, this is probably what they saw. And this is the type of pottery that they would eventually find. This black and white ware, this monochrome ware, this pottery itself that spread across this entire landscape. Very arts and crafts. Voila! you know, this is the type of stuff that Anne used to make in her pottery classes in the 1960s. The type of thing that would be sold, you know, throughout the 80s and throughout the 60s and 70s. The type of pottery that would be created in the 1930s. But this pottery itself comes from 1,000 years ago, 900 years ago. This pottery itself found in the crate load across this one single site, let alone all the other sites. And you look at this and you think, you know, even though this is very old pottery, this could be very new in an IKEA. So what we're talking about is actually, this is one part of the landscape. Actually, further over on the left is another landscape. A balcony house, because it looks like a balcony. Cliff Palace, yeah. Spruce Tree House. I wonder why Spruce Tree House is named. There's also another place known as Oak Tree House and Square Tower House. Actually, I think they actually run out of names, actually. And you've got a four-way stop and Cliff Palace Loop and all these wonderful things. And this site itself is only part of a great landscape. And maybe not all of these sites have actually been found. Petroglyphs, carvings, paintings on walls going back thousands and thousands of years, well before what we're seeing. So giving you a bit of context, as you go into the valley from the south, you've got Cliff Palace. If you go down one valley, you've got Balcony House, and then you go, it's said that lots of these were found by complete accident. Spruce Tree House, oh, wonderful names, wonderful names. And as we look at this, a little bit of a plan. Now I mentioned Colin Renfrew, Lord Renfrew, who he is. He's a lord. He became a lord because of his services to archaeology. So looking at this, he came up with a technique. He said that if you do something like this, you can slowly start to see the landscape is being divided into zones. Something like that. And maybe these kivas have a connection with the householder. And actually, if you want to divide it down again, it sorts to make it look a bit more sense. And you sort of look something like that. The reason I'm doing this, I'm putting it into zones. And what I'm trying to do is say that a kiva was directly related to the building, meaning that instead of the kiva having a great religious significance, it's got a great secular meaning to the people that were associated with it. When you think about from over here to over here, it's 150 meters if you sort of walk the curve. Or just over 100 meters from from south to north, for example. And what I want to do is tell you some bits and pieces before we actually have a break. And I've just looked at the time and thinking, yes, I think we'll have a little break soon. So I looked at this and I thought, this is a type of mug. We used to get these white mugs in home bargains, and I used to with my children, we used to go on black markers and have a bit of a design. So let's read what else is here. They named this place Cliff Palace, and they rode round the head of the canyon and found a way down over the cliffs to the level of the buildings. Probably some of the walkways that would have been used by the people who actually once lived at this site 700 years earlier. For the next few hours, they went slowly from room to room, wooden beams still protruding from the ceiling. Plaster still clung to some of the walls, as it still does here in some places. And listen to this. Skeletons lay on the floor. It appeared as though the inhabitants had left everything they possessed right where they had used it last. There were corn cobs, a stone axe, and broken pots. The brother-in-law of Richard Wetherill, Charlie Mason, came to believe that the Cliff Palace had withstood an extended siege and witnessed the final tragedy of its mysterious inhabitants. And so Richard Wetherill wrote, I'm not going to examine what I'm just about to read out. I'm going to allow you to do that. So here we go. All of the joists on which floors and roofs were laid had been wrenched out. These timbers are built into the walls and difficult to remove. Even the little willows on which the mud roofs and upper floors are laid were carefully taken out. No plausible reason for this has been advanced, except that it may have been used for fuel. Another strange circumstance is that so many of their valuable possessions were left in the rooms and covered with clay, of which the roofs and upper floors were made. Not to mention many of the walls broken down in tearing out the timbers. It would seem that their intention was to conceal their valuables so that their enemies might not secure them, or perhaps the people were in such despair the property was not considered. There were many human bones scattered about, as though several people had been killed and left unburied. Had Cliff Palace been abandoned and the timbers used in other buildings or movable or artifacts of value would have been taken away instead of being covered, and much of it broken and destroyed unnecessary. It seems to me that there can be no doubt that the cliff dwellers were exterminated by their more savage and warlike neighbors, the men being killed and the women being adopted into the tribe of the conquerors. Though in some instances migrations may have become necessary as a result of drought or pressure from outside tribes. That itself, even though Wetherill almost talked himself into the bodies being the people who actually lived there, he sort of talked himself out of it. However, the bone evidence is what interests me more than anything. And the problem is when the Wetherills were excavating there, they had to remove the bones to get through the layers of archaeology. So they just simply discarded them, which has denied us real evidence to understand what exactly happened at the site. The people, obviously large numbers of the people died at the site, and they're obviously their descendants, the Puebloan people today, like the Ute people and the Hopi people, still wander around the landscape today. So they didn't leave at all. Future archaeologists were to show that drought and natural disaster was a more likely explanation than siege or slaughter, which we have now found out to be another mistruth. With just a few hours of daylight remaining, the two cowboys split up to see what else they could find. Mason found nothing, but Richard Wetherill, riding north, made the second great discovery of the day. Sheltered by the cliff overhang of another canyon wall and almost hidden by fir trees was another large ruin, not as big, but even better preserved than the Cliff Palace itself. And that's where we're going to go. Look at all these wonderful images. Just clicking through a few images. And there it is. Spruce Tree House. Isn't that magnificent? Again, sheltered by an overhanging cliff, a dwelling with 70 rooms. Start again. I've misread that. Sorry, start that bit again. Scrub that. Let's go back to this one. I was reading the wrong thing then. Riding north made the second great discovery of the day, sheltered by the cliff overhang of another canyon wall and almost hidden by fir trees was another large ruin, not as big, but even better preserved than Cliff Palace itself, Spruce Tree House, which is in front of you. was to prove to be the best preserved dwelling in the whole of the Mesa Verde. And we will have a break there. Wonderful site, wonderful site. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to, so that's the Cliff Palace site. And after the break, we're going to go to Square Tower House. So I would like to know if there are any questions. And
How long was the site occupied for, Carl?
the main archaeology tells us that the site was probably occupied from probably the late noughties. So basically, we're talking about the dates that I've got, maybe about 900 to about 1300. But we know of evidence going back to 550 years AD. So roughly a period of 1,500 years ago, people are living directly within this type of landscape.
Okay, so they were dying as well. Any evidence of cemeteries? Bodies discovered?
After the break, darling.
Okay, all right. I'm ahead of myself.
As usual.
I'm going to go now. Get my coffee.
Right, let's have a break. Any other questions from anyone? Henri?
No, I think the only thing on the water one I've discovered, they've found at least 20 reservoirs, and some can hold up to 120,000 gallons, they estimate.
Obviously a major drought then.
Yeah.
Are
So
those the circular sumps I can see or not in front of the main building?
Those are the kivas, right? Now, they are described by all archaeologists and the sundry, right? So let's just find one. There's loads of them. Right, there. Let's enlarge. There, a kiva, right? Now, right, two things.
Yeah, there we are.
Two things, Bill, right? When on a Wednesday evening in the next few weeks, when we do burial chambers, I will say, look, these are chambers and these are burial chambers. But they were probably used for something else before they become burial chambers. Why can't these structures have been used to store water, even in jugs? Do you know what I mean?
That's my first thought, actually.
The thing is, right, the thing is, when we, on Monday, right, it was where did they store water? And nobody's actually saying where they stored water. You can't, basically, right, Bill, okay, if you had to get your water from the river, you would have to spend a big chunk of your time going to the river. You probably wouldn't be able to go shopping and various other things. You wouldn't be able to do much maintenance on the house because most of your time would be to collect water, particularly if you want a bath. The obvious answer is that they stored water on site.
Yes, yes.
So
And there may have been some channel to actually channel the water down from the upper levels, from the surface of the cliff down, and then maybe catchment areas on the top there to channel it down. Can't see any evidence of that.
But there are steps on the top, but yeah. So
Okay.
anything to say, Jessica? And give me a ring after this. Go on.
No, do you want me to call you on the phone?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'll do that now.
Speak to you in a minute. Bye.
Speak to you later. Bye.
Right. Let's share.
okay.
Let's I gotta, oh God, hang on a minute. Pause. Right, so we're back after the little break. So I think one thing that we were interested in was those circular kiva structures. Now, the next building we're going to look at now is known as the Square Tower House, Mesa Verde National Park. Now, they got lost, okay? They went looking they'd been to the Cliff Palace, and then there was the Spruce Tree House, was to prove to be the best preserved dwelling in the whole of the Mesa Verde. Richard Weatherhill did not enter the building that night, but went searching for it the next day. But they couldn't find it. They couldn't find the Spruce Tree House. So again, painting the landscape in the maze of snow-covered canyons, each one looking the same. They couldn't find the Spruce Tree House. They couldn't find it. It was nowhere to be found. Everything looked the same. But they completely lost their way and found instead yet another major ruin, which is this one. This is the Square Tower House. Obviously, that big tower gives it its name. It's a really interesting location, actually, for lots of reasons. So if we move on, and to give you an idea where the Square Tower House, there's the Square Tower House. So in other words, they got completely lost down this canyon, decided to go left, and then they ended up at the Square Tower House. And somebody said this would make an absolutely great film. I'd probably agree with them, actually. So after they got completely lost their way, they were now looking at, let's go for it, this amazing structure. And actually, in the Arnside class, one of the groups said, "What's that on the wall?" And I said, "I don't understand what you're talking about." And actually, if you look at the image, if we zoom in, I'm talking about petroglyphs. Do you see that interesting circular petroglyph on the wall? There?
Yeah.
Bringo, I'm glad you can see it. And to be honest with you, as you look at these images, the point is you can see more and more. I think the detail is in the eating, really. You can actually still see these timbers. It's absolutely amazing that you can still see these timbers. And the description that we've got earlier on, that sort of description, all the joists and which floors and roofs were laid had been wrenched out. You can actually clearly see that in this. They had wrenched the timbers out, and in doing so, they had deliberately done this. In doing so, lots of the floors within the building had been deliberately collapsed. Why is that? Very interesting. But anyway, what they did, this itself, again, sheltered by an overhanging cliff, a dwelling with 70 rooms, and the tower built against the canyon wall, the tallest structure they were to see, really. And you look at this and you think it's quite nice up there. And then somebody on Monday, they said, "Oh, Carl, what if the place was attacked? How would they be able to escape?" Well, I think they might be able to escape from the top of this building and go up the rock. But then again, I need to have more information than that. What the two men had discovered within those few days, they discovered a completely new civilization. The remains of a civilization that had existed well before the age of Christopher Columbus. They didn't know that at the time. Richard Wetherill, for him, it was a turning point. They were no longer reliant upon ranching for cattle. From now on, he was to spend his summers at the ranch and his winters searching for ruins. The search was to become his life's work. So he'd be searching for ruins for 2 decades, and he would find so many. Within days, Richard's brother John decided to go out. You can imagine, it's snowy. They decided to go out in the snow. Can't really ranch much because there's snow around. So went with 3 companions back searching in the ruins. At this time, they had gone for artifacts. They went to this one in particular, and they stretched a canvas over the top of one of the round subterranean rooms and lived at this site for a month. They found so many things at this site that they were able to live there for a month. They had no idea that what they were living in was this, in brackets, kiva, sacred room. And we've already explored this kiva a little bit. So again, looking up at that tower, it's amazing, isn't it? Looking at that. And again, so many views. And one interesting point, looking for this kiva, which is over there. One thing in archaeology is when you take photographs at different lighting conditions, this is the same site as this. You can, lots more of the landscape and the beautiful, the greens against the red and so on, the way these buildings are built. But obviously, this would have been rendered over, would have been had a nice whitewash on it and so on. So they actually spent their time looking room by room, digging into the piles of accumulated earth and fallen stones. They found stone tools, tools of bone, kitchen implements, and broken pottery. So this is what they found in the upper layers of the excavations. But as they dug deeper, they found lots of that distinctive white and white and black pottery, distinctive markings, baskets, shells, beads, and pieces of cloth. At the back of the cave, where the roof was too low for houses, was what's referred to as the turkey house. So at the back of these locations, not best shown at this site, but yet best shown at this one maybe, at the back of those buildings there, at the back of those very buildings there. This is known as the, yeah, this is the Cliff Palace site as well. So basically, as they look at the backs of these buildings, they started finding evidence that they kept turkeys, and also the communal rubbish dump. Now, having an associated turkey house with a rubbish dump is very useful, because the turkeys will eat the rubbish. They will go through the rubbish, they will scrape it, they will turn it. And then after they were seeing the rubbish dumps, all that sort of waste evidence, which is something I'd love to go through, these cowboys of the West came face to face with the cliff dwellers themselves. They described, these mummies were not embalmed, but they simply dried from the corpse having been buried in ground so dry that complete decomposition did not take place. And from the descriptions, long hair still hung over the dried skin and bone. Even the eyes were still in place. Only the spark of life was missing. And I trolled to find images of these human remains, but I couldn't find them. Because what was happening is, as they're exposing the human remains, they're decomposing, they're removing the artifacts to sell. And as they're going through the soil, all the soil is being deposited somewhere. So if ever I went here, the thing that I would love to do is excavate into the spoil heaps left by the archaeologists. It soon became obvious that digging in the ruins could be very profitable. Artifacts could be sold. They could drag in tourists into the site. This is another one of those sites, another site known as the Oak Tree House. Again, all very interesting, spectacular pieces of evidence. And again, going back, looking at our first image of the Cliff Palace, as we move on to this one, which is Fortified House. But before we actually get to Fortified House, more of the descriptions from our friends at Wetherills. Our previous work had been carried out to satisfy more our own curiosity than for any other purpose. But this time it was a business proposition. So obviously they aimed to make money out of these things, money out of the archaeological evidence. This is a towering, shady, misty relic. This is known as the Fortified House, which we'll actually show you an image of coming up. And one of the many other ruins that they found was actually Fortified House, which is actually not that one. Oh God, it's a bit further on. Where's this Fortified House building? There it is. That's our Fortified House. There it is. So with a description of this one, some walls along the ledge on which the house is built were undoubtedly put there for defensive purposes. This house did not yield much until one day John found a measurement that there was space near the center of the building for a small room to which no entrance could be found. So he made one through the top. The room was small, not over 5 or 6 feet square, but in it were 5 skeletons, about a dozen pieces of pottery, several baskets, the finest we have ever seen, also a bow and a dozen arrows, all nearly perfect except the bow. The bow was the heaviest one we had ever found, and it was well wrapped with sinews. Part of the string remained. It was made of twisted sinews and was wider than a slate pencil, actually. And he could draw one of those arrows to the head. With such a bow, must have been a powerful man. And one of the arrows had an agate tip, and various other of the stone that they're using for these tips Bowls were placed between the skulls, and on the feet of one of the skeletons was a pair of moccasins like the ones we wear today. The owner of the bow was probably the man whose skeleton was larger than any of the others and clothed in a buckskin suit and cap that seemed almost new. So going back to where we were, again, we've already seen this one. And actually, I just want to show you this image from the book. If you can actually look at the screen a minute. Hang on a minute. So can you see that little image there? Yeah.
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 Yeah, that one. Now that's rather interesting. That's when they're in a kiva, and it's so beautifully rendered on the walls that they put graffiti on it, and obviously that leads to them sort of thinking a little bit deeper on how to respect the archaeology that they're looking at and what's around them. So this site, Spruce Tree House, the diggings continued and the artifacts were removed to the ranch, where they were put on display in a small museum. During the summer, as the word spread and the interest grew, people began to come to the ranch to see the relics and to ride the 30-mile round trip into the Mesa Verde to see the sites. So there's a lot of area they've got to cover. But as a criticism, compared to the scientific methods of Alfred Maudslay, was employing at exactly the same time on the sites of the Maya people in Mexico, the methods the Weatheralls were using were a little different from Giovanni Battista Bazzoni as he worked in 1817 in Egypt and did as much damage. It could be argued as similar to Schliemann working at Troy, but obviously, like Bazzoni, like Schliemann, like the Weatherhills, they came to respect the archaeology and they started to preserve it. And they also, even though they were selling on these goods and so on, they actually improved their excavation skills and they were able to understand more as they went along. So their knowledge increased, so their excavation techniques improved. They appealed to the Smithsonian Institute and the Peabody Museum at Harvard for assistance. They refused. They weren't interested in the Native American landscape. Learned institutions like that who could have sent in archaeologists to help, they weren't interested. Although the brothers saw the sale of artifacts as a way of financing their digs, all the collections eventually end up in museums on display. But you can actually find some of the artifacts. You can actually buy some of their artifacts on eBay today. There were hundreds of thousands of artifacts that went to museums and traded out. And it was eventually said by Al Weatherhill, one of the brothers, that we never destroyed nor permitted destruction of any of the buildings nor their contents, feeling that we were the custodians of a priceless heritage. It's amazing that the Weatherhills connected with a heritage that wasn't their own, but they respected the heritage. And it's great that they made it their own. Those who came as tourists were aware that we would allow no damage nor wanton pilfering, and not many of them were the type that would have pilfered anyway. So as we come to the end of these beautiful images and looking again, it's amazing looking at these images, looking at these kivas in front. We'll have a little look at these kivas now. This is actually the Spruce Tree House. You can see more with this than what I was trying to describe earlier on about the Tower Palace. Earlier on, where you can actually clearly see that if you divided these structures to all have their own kiva, something like that, and obviously it was divided like that. Over here was a trading district, and if you look at that there, you can clearly see if you divide up the landscape as Colin Renfrew would do. This is how he divided the relationship with Chambers on the island of Rousey with settlements. You can basically, if you work out that a kiva and a building accommodated about 15 people, and then you times it by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 times 15. So under 100 people would have lived at this site. And again, you know, this that relationship with the landscape and the need for supplies and the need to live here for many generations. There's lots of mysteries that we can't really answer because the work was done in the 1800s without modern science. Lots of the questions about where water was stored and where the food was stored and what exactly really happened at the end may never be answered. And as we're, you know, these, when you look up in the buildings, you can see these like weird doorway window type things, which are shaped like this. And this is a Navajo boy from 1929 showing us those resting bits on the side of the windows. And just one thing, you can obviously see the architecture with that Navajo boy with these windows here, the strange shapes of the windows. But if we look at these structures, these kivas, the one thing is that these would have been full of pottery and bones and all sorts of bits and pieces, collapsed timber, because this would have been roofed over. Maybe if lots of these hadn't have been dug into, we would be able to work out if these ever were used to store water and how. Said water, as it drains off, leads sediment. As water leaks, it leads sediment, even if this was lined. And that's those sedimentary traces, different sedimentary traces, could be understood and examined. And obviously, we've lost that opportunity because of the later, because the excavations in the 1800s. But looking into these structures, so they were able to get an idea how to reconstruct. Later in the 1890s, for example, they started bringing in, they brought in an archaeologist known as Gustav Nordenskjöld, who brought scientific excavation into understanding the site. And he was one that, Nish, who started to say that these were ceremonial rooms because they were originally thought to store water. And the exact age of the ruins, however, remained a mystery. Spanish priests who had crossed the region in the 1700s on their way from Mexico to the missions of California had neither seen the ruins nor mentioned them. So in that case, the Swedish archaeologist Gustav Nordenskjöld said, oh, actually, they must date from after the Spanish priests go across the landscape and actually before the 1880s. And he found a timber that somehow he dated to 182 years old, dated to no later than about 1739. And he actually thought, this Swedish archaeologist, that the site could not be hundreds of years old, like 700 years old, because it was so well preserved. But Douglas in the 1930s with the dendrochronology clearly dated the site. In making, and Charlie Mason, actually we're coming close to the end now. Charlie Mason, the brother-in-law of Richard Wetherell, said, in making these collections, we learn much about the cliff dwellers' life. They were agriculturists and raised crops of corn, beans, and squashes, and kept tame turkeys. Their corn is a yellow dent with some red ears, not all like the corn grown by the Navajo today. Their beans are similar to the beans of the Mexicans. The squashes were of good size. So obviously they find all this evidence. They get a good idea. And the final thing to be really said, we'll look at these images in a minute. The apparent association with Mexico brought the assumption in some quarters that the ruins had been built by the Aztecs or the Maya. But the assumption was wrong. What we know now is that the buildings and the artifacts of the Mesa Verde date, for the most part, from the 11 or 1200s, from the last period of the Pueblo Indian culture, and indigenous Stone Age culture that began in the region at the time of Christ, but which ceased to develop around 1250, when, for some unknown reason, the buildings of the Mesa Verde were abandoned. One of the last datable timbers seen to date from 1278. Well, I feel we know why this landscape was abandoned. We've got the evidence of people being killed and But unfortunately, all that evidence has been disposed of in the spoil heaps. And that evidence would be wonderful to excavate. But that's my idea anyway. So you're looking at these niches inside this building. In a way, to me, they look like communal centers for the family, that the family could meet and discuss things. And that's a religion in itself. A family sat around the table, you could think that that's a religious act, that you do it on a regular basis, a ritual. And this is what the reconstruction has looked like. What you've got what they've done, they've roofed up the kivas. They put some flooring above and they put these nice ladders poking up. Lovely piece of archaeology. And again, seeing how this works, there's a lot of timber about to build these over various different stages in their history. An idea of the close proximity between the doors and the streets and so on. This is a site known as Oak Tree. Again, you look at this and you think how well these walls are built. You know, we don't get anything like this of this date surviving in most parts of the world. And again, these have stood the test of time. 700 years, nobody there. Even if people had gone there, it's a fascinating site. And again, this is that balcony house. Somebody crawling through. Little strange features. I thought I'd chuck this in there. And here we go. There's Bill. With his lead.
My rear end.
Yeah, I would be up your rear end, Bill, pushing you forward.
Yes, that's happened before too.
God. Moving on, Bill. I got to be honest with you. I always remember that one where we were in that really tight chamber standing up and that dog ran in as well. Yeah, that was, yeah. Anyway, this is that balcony house. And it sort of reminiscent of something you might see in Spain, but this is 700 years old. And trees growing out the walls and this wonderful sense of the past. And Longhouse, for example, you know. And you never guess what this is called. Give it a guess, Jessica, what this building's called.
Something to do with steps?
It's called Step House. But then on Tuesday, they all went off on one. They said, they don't look like authentic steps. And I'm thinking, no, you're referring to the terraces. But obviously, there are rock-cut steps to go up to the Mesa above so that they can tend their crops. And on that note, that's the last image. So are there any questions on any of that today?
Well, it's interesting to get more information on the water collecting systems, the cemeteries, and they obviously were hunters and farmers. Was any evidence of any farms or small holdings anywhere in the area? Obviously, the cluster of these four villages, indicates some sort of tribal system, different groups living within each other.
Actually, Bill, I need to stop you there. They found nearly 200 of these.
What, bodies?
No, 200 of these settlements.
Villages, really? Oh.
Yeah, 200 of them.
Yeah, yeah.
So
there must be some sort of tribal system. They're living in peace. Some sort of hierarchy as well.
Actually, Bill, you've asked the same question that I had as a question this morning. What we've got is lots of evidence as well. If you're looking at the screen, hang on a minute. Let's just get this one off. If we have me speaking, and look at that image in the village. In there, basically, some of the early settlements are these types of, you could describe them as Gruben houses in the British context, where they cut pits into the ground and build structures up from them. And obviously then they develop into these, but we don't actually know. They may have actually had these, they continued living in these as well as these other structures. Yeah,
yeah. Presumably there's ongoing research, different groups, universities go there on a regular basis to do excavations as is the norm for these sort of ancient sites.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly.
There's a lot of Go carry on. I'll finish now. I'll stop.
Okay, okay. Right, Anne, would you like to say anything?
I just was, you know, what kept going through my mind was washing machine. No, not
Oh,
washing machines, but what? No, where did they do their washing? I mean, that's one of the most important things. When you see a you know, native village, they usually go to the river.
I'm going to answer
do
that
the
one now.
washing.
I'm going to answer that one now. Anything else you'd like to say? Because I got this written in front of me. No? Go on.
No.
Right. Anne, are you still joining us tonight as well?
Yeah.
Right, right. Bill's not. Anyway, so listen to this, Anne. Listen to this. 4 prehistoric reservoirs at Mesa Verde National Park were constructed between AD 750 and AD 1180, which is when the height of their civilization here. These 4 ancient reservoirs represent extraordinary engineering achievement for the ancestral Pueblo people in an arid environment with very little surface water. These prehistoric people found ways to route and capture runoff to create sustainable domestic water supply reservoirs. And it goes on to say some key facts. Maize pollen is present in soil samples taken from these sites, proving nearby agriculture and a link with these sites. Reservoirs were operated successfully with evidence indicating a period of 350 years. Examination of reservoir sediment deposits and potsherds can provide a sequential record of human activities and timeline data. Dredging was necessary at all 4 reservoirs to maintain storage capacity, so they maintained them. Stone walls were built at Far View and Sager Bush reservoirs to retain dredged sediment. So they knew how to maintain the system. The ancestral Pueblans harvested water supply from areas where modern engineers would say there was none. So when you think about the engineering feat of the Hoover Dam and you think, well, you know, that was a struggle. These people just did it. Without good organization capabilities, such large, continuously operated public works would not have been possible. All 4 Mesa Verde reservoirs are on an east-west alignment. Oh, that's east-west straight line. Forget about that fact. Anyway, Pat, would you like to say anything? Pat's probably been here, hasn't she?
Well, I did drive through. We took the car, you know, we went to the visitor center and then we just drove those 30 miles, you know, looking up. So it was really nice today to be able to see inside, you know, because I wasn't like those people, you know, climbing up there. When we were there also, they pointed out there were steps, as you said, going up to the top of the mesa, you know, to get the crops and all. So it was very interesting. Thank you.
My pleasure. What about you, Henri?
No, I think the water management thing, I think, is something that's been discovered in recent years.
Yes.
And I think the number of reservoirs, I think I read, has been gone up to at least 20 now.
Oh, well, to be honest with you, right, I'm going to stop you there, right? This drought theory is crap. Carry on, Henry.
So I've obviously, to survive, they were excellent engineers in water management.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, they must have, I think they must have brought the water from the reservoirs to the sites via some method of channeling, you know.
Well,
Go on.
you can have things such as tree trunks can be used and carved out to actually provide gullies to bring water. You find those in other civilizations. There's plenty of trees here, so it's a natural resource. You won't, unfortunately, you won't find evidence of it now because it would have actually disappeared.
Yeah. I mean, that's good. Good evidence there.
Good evidence, exactly right. And anyone else like to say anything before we finish? Next week we're doing the Sassanid Empire. Obviously,
which one?
the Sassanid Empire, the Arch of Ctesiphon.
Ctesiphon, right? Okay, yes, I remember that. Carl, before you go off, one quick question about Cornwall. What's the name of the accommodation again?
You're staying at the Agapanthus. You actually. We have Rona, our clerical officer, has got a letter being sent out to you. So,
okay, and where is it? Well, what town are we in?
Penzance.
Penzance. Okay, thank you.
All right. So I'll just sort of do a recap. Obviously, next week we've got the walk on the 7th of November, Bridgend, meeting at the bottom of Newcastle Hill. This thing about you know, Kathy and a couple of others wanting to meet. We need to sort that one out. You know about the York trip. You know about Saturday and Sunday, 1 o'clock on Sunday. If you're going to do that with the library, and obviously the walk around Lantern Major at 1:30. If there's nothing else, I'll see you guys tonight. And Jessica and Pat's not doing tonight, is she?
No, I'm not. Sorry.
That's too much for Pat. Yeah.
I'm sinking.
So no, I will see Jessica, Bill, and Anne tonight. Henry next week. And Pat. Pat, are you going on Sunday then, or?
No, not Sunday.
All right. Okay.
But Saturday, yeah, I'll be there.
No,
Oh, I'm seeing you on
yeah.
Saturday. Oh, cool. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't forget to bring a face mask.
Right.
So what I'm going to do, I'm going to call it a day now. We will have something very brief on YouTube today, but it's going to be very, very brief. So I'll set that up for 10 minutes or so. But then I'm going to sit down. I'm going to go through my notes for this evening, make sure the images are sorted, and that will be it. So if that's it, I am going to love you all and leave you.
Bye.
Particularly,
Thank you.
particularly loving you all.
Bye,
So,
Jess.
Thank you.
anyway, I'm going to take
Bye,
care.
then.
Bye-bye,
Bye.
Jess, Bill,
Bye.
Henry,
Bye.
Pat.
Bye.
All
Bye.
stay safe.
Yeah, stay safe. Don't do the drugs. See you, Anne. Take care. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Find the off button.
Yeah, I would. Oh. Take care.